Sometimes the smallest witness carries the greatest truth. The first thing Officer Ethan Brooks hears is not the sound of machines or hurried footsteps. It is a familiar heartbeat resting somewhere beyond the haze that has swallowed his thoughts. The rhythm is steady, patient, almost impossible to ignore. Yet when he struggles to open his eyes, the world remains wrapped in pale light and quiet uncertainty. Morning sunshine slips through the hospital window, painting soft golden lines across polished floors and crisp white blankets. Outside, autumn leaves drift lazily across the parking lot, while the American flag above the entrance moves gently beneath a cool October breeze. Inside room 214, every clock seems louder than normal. Every second feels heavier. Ethan has spent nearly 20 years serving others as a police officer, responding to emergencies before most people even realize something is wrong. He has walked frightened children home, comforted families after terrible nights, and stood between strangers and danger more times than he can remember. Strength has always been the language he understands. Now strength has quietly slipped away, replaced by exhaustion that no one can explain. 20 doctors have reviewed every test. Specialists from different departments have examined every possibility. Blood work appears normal. Imaging reveals nothing unusual. Every answer somehow creates another question. One physician quietly calls it an extraordinary medical mystery. Another simply shakes his head before leaving the room with tired eyes. Ethan hears enough whispers to understand what they are afraid to say aloud. They are running out of ideas. Beside the hospital bed sits Ranger, a 4-year-old German shepherd whose calm presence fills the silent room far better than words ever could. Hospital staff have made rare exceptions because everyone quickly notices something unusual. The dog never barks without reason. He never paces nervously. He simply watches. His intelligent amber eyes never drift far from Ethan's face, as though measuring every breath with unwavering devotion. Nurses passing through the hallway often smile when they see him sitting perfectly still, ears alert, tail resting quietly against the polished floor. One nurse whispers that the dog seems to understand more than anyone else inside the building. Another gently reaches toward Ranger, but he barely notices. His entire attention belongs to the man lying in the bed. Ethan slowly lifts trembling fingers toward the edge of the mattress. Ranger immediately rises and places his warm muzzle beneath the waiting hand. The touch is gentle, familiar, reassuring. Ethan cannot manage a full smile, yet the smallest change appears around his tired eyes. For one brief moment, fear loses its grip. Outside the room, conversations continue in careful voices filled with uncertainty. Inside, silence becomes something different. It becomes hope waiting patiently for its chance. Then something changes. Ranger slowly lifts his head. His ears stand perfectly straight. His eyes move away from Ethan for the first time all morning and settle toward the far corner of the hospital room. There is nothing remarkable there. Only a quiet wall, an air vent humming softly above a cabinet, and morning light stretching across the floor. The dog remains completely still. Seconds pass. His breathing slows. His entire body becomes focused with absolute certainty, as though he has noticed something that every person inside the hospital has somehow overlooked. No one else pays attention. But before this story reaches its end, that single silent glance will change everything 20 doctors believed they knew. Ethan Brooks does not remember falling asleep. He only remembers that somewhere between another round of careful examinations and another quiet conversation outside his hospital room, time itself seems to dissolve. Hours become impossible to measure. Ranger remains exactly where he has always chosen to be, watching with the same patient devotion that has never depended on words. Several weeks earlier, life follows an entirely different rhythm. Every weekday begins before sunrise. Ethan leaves his small house in a peaceful Ohio neighborhood while the streets are still covered with cool morning mist. He pours fresh coffee into a travel mug, nods politely to the elderly couple watering flowers across the street, and gently scratches Ranger behind the ears before opening the front door. The German shepherd never rushes. He walks beside Ethan with quiet confidence, matching every step without needing commands. At the police station, fellow officers often joke that Ranger behaves with more discipline than most recruits. Ethan always smiles but never boasts. He simply says that trust cannot be trained in a single day. It is earned one small moment at a time. During patrol, Ethan notices details that many people overlook. He helps an elderly man carry groceries after a flat tire leaves him stranded. He kneels beside a frightened child who has become separated from her parents during a crowded community festival. He spends extra time speaking with lonely veterans who simply want someone willing to listen. Ranger remains calm through every encounter, greeting nervous strangers with gentle eyes instead of excitement. Children quickly fall in love with the handsome German Shepherd. Elderly residents often keep dog treats waiting in their pockets because they know Ranger will visit again. Their partnership quietly becomes part of the neighborhood itself. Every afternoon, they stop beside the same small lake before returning home. Ethan removes his badge, sits on an old wooden bench, and watches sunlight dance across gentle waves while Ranger explores nearby grass with relaxed curiosity. Those peaceful moments become their unspoken routine. Ethan often laughs softly whenever Ranger discovers another interesting scent carried by the breeze. It is a simple life, yet it feels complete. Then small changes begin appearing so gradually that they seem almost meaningless. Ethan occasionally feels unusually tired after finishing an ordinary shift. Climbing the front porch steps leaves him breathing slightly harder than expected. He dismisses the discomfort as stress, longer work hours, or perhaps another seasonal illness. Ranger notices something different. During evening walks, the dog slows his pace without being asked. He repeatedly looks back toward Ethan, studying him with growing concern. One evening, Ethan sits on the familiar bench beside the lake much earlier than usual. He closes his eyes for only a moment, but Ranger gently nudges his arm before resting his head against Ethan's knee. Ethan smiles faintly and whispers that he is simply getting older. The words sound harmless enough, yet Ranger does not seem convinced. As autumn deepens across the quiet town, colorful leaves gather beneath the trees and crisp air fills every morning. Ethan continues reporting for duty because responsibility has always mattered more than comfort. Even so, invisible exhaustion quietly follows him from sunrise until nightfall. Nobody else notices the difference. Nobody except the loyal German Shepherd who begins watching every breath, every pause, and every silent moment with increasing attention, as though he already senses that something hidden has entered both of their lives long before anyone else can see it. The first visit to the family doctor lasts less than 30 minutes. The physician listens carefully, reviews routine laboratory results, smiles politely, and recommends more rest, better hydration, and a short vacation. Ethan thanks him with quiet respect because arguing has never been part of his nature. Ranger waits beside the examination table without making a sound, watching every movement with calm attention. During the following week, nothing improves. Ethan wakes before sunrise as always, yet every step toward the front door feels strangely heavier. His coffee grows cold before he finishes half the cup. The familiar morning breeze that once felt refreshing now seems unusually difficult to breathe through. Ranger begins walking closer than before, almost brushing Ethan's leg with every step as though refusing to let even a few inches separate them. Soon another physician orders more comprehensive testing. Blood samples fill several small tubes. Heart monitoring lasts an entire afternoon. Imaging scans produce crisp photographs that appear perfectly ordinary. Every specialist studies the reports carefully before offering nearly identical conclusions. Nothing explains why a healthy police officer continues losing strength a little more every day. Ethan returns home carrying another folder filled with reassuring words that somehow provide no comfort at all. Autumn quietly deepens across the neighborhood. Maple trees glow with brilliant shades of crimson and gold, while children laugh on bicycles after school. Ethan still smiles and waves at every familiar face, yet his smile fades more quickly than before. He begins sitting down halfway through simple household chores. Carrying groceries from the truck requires unexpected pauses. Ranger notices every hesitation. Whenever Ethan stops to catch his breath, the German Shepherd immediately turns around and waits without impatience. The dog no longer chases squirrels through the yard or runs freely around the nearby lake. Instead, he watches Ethan with unwavering concentration, studying his breathing, his posture, and even the smallest change in expression. Friends from the police department encourage Ethan to take medical leave until doctors discover the cause. Reluctantly, he agrees. The badge that has rested proudly on his uniform for years now remains inside a wooden drawer near the front door. Each morning, Ethan looks toward it for a few silent seconds before walking away. Ranger sits beside him every single time, resting quietly without demanding attention. Then the appointments become more frequent. Specialists from neighboring cities review the growing stack of medical records. Neurologists, pulmonologists, cardiologists, and immunologists all search for answers hidden somewhere inside pages of normal findings. Every examination ends with another puzzled expression. One respected physician softly admits that Ethan's symptoms do not match any obvious diagnosis. Ranger reacts differently inside every examination room. Most of the time, he remains perfectly composed. Yet whenever one particular maintenance hallway near the diagnostic wing comes into view through an open doorway, his ears immediately rise. His eyes fix on the distant corridor instead of Ethan. He inhales slowly, almost thoughtfully, before looking back toward the hallway again. Nurses assume he has heard unfamiliar equipment. Ethan gently strokes the dog's neck and whispers that everything is all right. Ranger obeys the reassuring touch, but only for a moment. Before leaving the building, he glances over his shoulder one last time toward that same quiet corridor. No one notices except an elderly volunteer arranging fresh flowers near the waiting room window. She watches the German Shepherd paws, tilts her head with quiet curiosity, and softly says to herself that sometimes faithful hearts notice what busy minds accidentally overlook. The hospital becomes Ethan Brooks's new routine, although nothing about it ever feels familiar. Every morning begins with quiet footsteps in polished hallways, the faint scent of fresh coffee drifting from the nurse's station, and sunlight filtering through tall windows that overlook rows of maple trees, turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson. Doctors continue searching with remarkable dedication. New consultations are scheduled. Additional specialists review every page of his growing medical file. Each examination begins with cautious optimism and ends with the same gentle uncertainty. Ethan never loses his patience. He thanks every physician for their time, smiles whenever a nurse checks on him, and quietly accepts another recommendation for more testing. Ranger remains beside him through nearly every visit, lying calmly near the hospital bed with the quiet dignity that has earned the respect of everyone on the floor. More than once, nurses comment that the German Shepherd seems unusually observant. They laugh softly when Ranger appears to anticipate their arrival before they even reach the doorway. Ethan smiles with quiet pride, explaining that Ranger has always paid attention to details other people overlook. Yet over the following days, something begins happening often enough that it no longer feels like coincidence. Whenever the room becomes still and conversations fade into the distance, Ranger slowly lifts his head and turns toward the same corner of the room. It is the far corner nearest an air vent positioned above a narrow wooden cabinet. There is nothing unusual about it. No medical equipment stands there. No staff members linger nearby. Only a pale wall, a softly humming ventilation grill, and a patch of sunlight that slowly moves across the floor as the afternoon passes. Ranger stares without blinking. His ears stand perfectly upright. His breathing becomes slower, almost measured, as though every instinct inside him is listening to something beyond ordinary hearing. Ethan notices the behavior, but assumes the dog has discovered an interesting sound inside the walls. A nurse kneels beside Ranger one afternoon and gently rubs behind his ears. The German Shepherd barely reacts. His eyes remain fixed on the same quiet corner. She follows his gaze, smiles politely, and says that perhaps he has found a mouse hiding somewhere in the building. Everyone laughs for a moment before returning to their work. The room grows quiet again, and Ranger slowly resumes watching that silent space. The pattern repeats itself day after day. Morning, afternoon, evening, different physicians, different nurses, different visitors. Always the same corner. Always the same unwavering attention. Ethan begins wondering whether Ranger is simply trying to protect him in the only way he knows. Even so, he cannot ignore how focused the dog has become. One evening, after another long series of examinations produces no answers, Ethan reaches down and gently places his hand against Ranger's neck. The German Shepherd immediately softens beneath the familiar touch, but only for a brief moment. Within seconds, his eyes return to the vent once more. Outside the room, The hallway fills with the quiet sounds of rolling carts, distant conversations, and elevators opening and closing. Inside, the silence feels strangely heavier than before. Near the nurse's station, an older man wearing a weathered Marine Corps cap pauses while waiting for visiting hours to end. He has noticed Ranger's unusual behavior every time he passes the room during the past several days. Unlike everyone else, he does not dismiss it as ordinary curiosity. He watches the German Shepherd study the silent corner with absolute certainty, narrows his eyes thoughtfully, and quietly tells himself that a well-trained dog almost never stares at nothing. The man wearing the faded Marine Corps cap returns the next morning, carrying nothing more than a paper cup of black coffee and years of quiet observation earned through service. His name is Daniel Carter, a retired gunnery sergeant who now spends several afternoons each week visiting fellow veterans recovering inside the hospital. He has seen courage expressed in countless forms, and he has learned one lesson that time has never erased. When a well-trained working dog refuses to ignore something, there is usually a reason. Daniel slows his pace as he reaches room 214. Ranger is resting beside Ethan's bed, but the peaceful image lasts only a few seconds. Without warning, the German Shepherd raises his head, his ears become perfectly still, and his amber eyes drift once again toward the same distant corner where the quiet air vent hums almost too softly to notice. Daniel does not interrupt. He simply watches. The dog's posture is not fearful. It is focused. There is no sign of confusion, excitement, or anxiety. Ranger behaves exactly as if he is waiting for someone else to recognize what he has already discovered. Ethan notices the retired Marine standing in the doorway and offers a tired but genuine smile. Daniel introduces himself with a warm handshake and explains that he often visits police officers and veterans during long hospital stays because no one should face difficult days alone. Their conversation is calm and unhurried. They speak about Ohio winters, neighborhood diners, baseball games, and the peaceful lake where Ethan and Ranger used to end each shift before heading home. For several minutes the room almost feels normal again. Then Ranger quietly stands. He walks toward the far corner of the room, stopping several feet from the cabinet beneath the air vent. He does not bark. He does not scratch at the wall. He simply remains there, staring upward with complete certainty before slowly looking back toward Daniel instead of Ethan. The retired Marine feels an unexpected chill despite the warm afternoon sunlight filling the room. He walks to the same spot and studies the wall, the cabinet, and the vent with careful attention. Everything appears perfectly ordinary. A nurse passing by smiles and gently explains that the dog has been fascinated by that corner for days. She laughs softly, suggesting he probably hears airflow moving through old ventilation ducts. Daniel smiles politely, but something inside him remains unconvinced. Before leaving the room, he kneels beside Ranger and quietly places a weathered hand against the dog's shoulder. Ranger immediately relaxes for a brief moment, then lifts his eyes toward the vent once more. It is enough to strengthen Daniel's growing suspicion. Later that evening, instead of driving straight home, Daniel stops near the hospital information desk and politely asks whether he may review the public maintenance maps showing patient wings and ventilation routes. The volunteer behind the desk looks surprised by the unusual request, but points him toward the facility's office down the hallway. Daniel thanks her and walks away with steady determination. Behind him, the late afternoon sun stretches long golden shadows across the polished floor, while inside room 214, Ranger quietly returns to Ethan's bedside. Yet even as he rests his head beside the bed, his eyes never fully leave that silent corner, as though an invisible thread continues pulling his attention toward a truth that everyone else still walks past without seeing. Daniel Carter spends nearly an hour studying the maintenance diagrams spread across a small table inside the facility's office. The blueprints are ordinary enough, showing ventilation shafts, electrical lines, utility closets, and inspection panels that have quietly served the hospital for decades. Nothing immediately appears unusual. A maintenance supervisor notices Daniel's interest and politely explains that every system is inspected on schedule and carefully documented. Daniel thanks him sincerely, folds the printed map, and leaves without making accusations because experience has taught him that certainty should never arrive before evidence. Even so, one question refuses to leave his mind. Why would a disciplined German Shepherd ignore everyone in the room only to focus on the exact same place every single day? The following afternoon, he returns to room 214 carrying a small notebook instead of coffee. Ethan looks weaker than the day before, although he still greets Daniel with the same quiet dignity that has always defined him. The doctors remain encouraging, but their conversations have grown noticeably shorter. Another specialist has reviewed the medical records that morning. Once again, every result appears almost perfectly normal. Ranger watches the familiar exchange for a few moments before slowly lifting his head. Just as before, his eyes drift toward the corner beneath the humming air vent. Daniel writes down the exact time. 20 minutes later, a respiratory therapist enters the room. Ranger briefly acknowledges her arrival with a calm glance before returning his attention to the vent. Daniel records that as well. He begins noticing tiny patterns that everyone else dismisses because each one seems too insignificant to matter on its own. Every few minutes, a faint mechanical vibration travels through the floor, lasting only a second before disappearing. The soft hum inside the ventilation duct changes almost imperceptibly throughout the afternoon. At one point, Daniel catches the slightest unfamiliar odor in the air. It is neither strong nor unpleasant, almost impossible to describe, disappearing before he can decide whether he truly noticed it. Ranger, however, notices immediately. The German Shepherd slowly inhales, stands to his feet, and quietly walks closer to the vent without making a sound. His ears remain perfectly still while his eyes narrow with complete concentration. Daniel feels his pulse quicken. He walks toward the same corner and breathes deeply several times. The scent is already gone. A passing nurse smiles kindly and says older ventilation systems sometimes carry harmless odors from different parts of the building whenever airflow changes. Daniel nods politely, yet the explanation leaves him unsatisfied. Later that evening, he compares his handwritten notes with the maintenance map. The vent inside Ethan's room connects to a long section of ductwork that passes through several mechanical spaces before reaching the rooftop equipment. Nothing appears broken on paper, but paper has never revealed every truth. Before leaving for the night, Daniel quietly kneels beside Ranger once more. The German Shepherd gently places his nose against Daniel's hand, then turns back toward the vent with unwavering certainty. Daniel looks into those calm amber eyes and realizes he is no longer following a suspicion. He is following a witness who cannot speak, yet somehow continues telling the same silent story over and over again, waiting for someone willing to listen before time quietly runs out. Rain arrives just after sunset, covering the hospital windows with gentle streams that blur the glowing lights of the parking lot into soft golden reflections. Inside the building, the evening settles into a quieter rhythm. Visiting hours have ended. Hallways grow still except for distant footsteps, the occasional rolling cart, and the steady hum of machines working faithfully through another long night. Ethan sleeps more than he speaks now. His breathing remains calm but noticeably weaker, and each morning seems to leave him with less strength than the one before. Even so, every doctor who visits his room continues searching with remarkable determination, refusing to surrender to uncertainty. Daniel Carter returns after dinner carrying only his notebook and the folded maintenance map that has become worn along its edges. He pauses outside room 214 before stepping inside. Ranger is already awake. The German Shepherd greets him with a slow wag of his tail before immediately turning his attention toward the familiar corner beneath the air vent. Daniel studies the dog instead of the room. He has begun trusting Ranger's consistency more than his own assumptions. Nearly every mystery eventually reveals a pattern, but only to someone patient enough to recognize it. Shortly after 9 o'clock, the overhead lights flicker for less than a second. Most people inside the hospital barely notice. Computers continue running. Medical equipment remains active. Conversations never stop. Yet Ranger reacts instantly. His ears rise. He stands without hesitation and walks directly toward the vent before stopping beneath it. Instead of staring upward as he always has, he suddenly turns toward the hallway. His nose lifts into the air. He inhales once, then again, moving with quiet certainty toward the open doorway. Daniel follows without speaking. Ranger continues through the corridor at an unhurried pace, passing nurses who smile as he walks by. He ignores every distraction. The polished floor reflects the soft ceiling lights while the scent of disinfectant mingles with fresh coffee drifting from a break room nearby. At the far end of the hallway, Ranger pauses beside a gray service door marked Facilities Access, Authorized Personnel Only. He does not bark. He simply remains there, looking first at the door, then back at Daniel, before touching the lower edge of the metal frame with his nose. Daniel gently rests his hand against the handle. The door is locked. A maintenance employee pushing a supply cart notices him and politely explains that the room contains ventilation equipment and utility controls servicing several patient rooms, including Ethan's wing. Daniel thanks him, but before he can ask another question, the lights flicker once more. This time, the faint mechanical hum behind the door changes ever so slightly, producing a brief vibration that Daniel feels through the metal handle resting beneath his fingertips. It lasts no more than a heartbeat before everything returns to normal. Ranger remains perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the closed door with unwavering certainty. Daniel slowly unfolds the maintenance map beneath the hallway lights and compares the room number with the printed diagram. His heartbeat quickens. The service room behind the locked door connects directly to the ventilation line running above Ethan's hospital bed. For the first time since this quiet mystery began, the invisible thread that Ranger has followed day after day no longer feels imagined. It finally leads somewhere real. Daniel Carter does not sleep much that night. Long after the rain has stopped, he sits inside the quiet hospital cafeteria with the folded maintenance map spread across the table, tracing the ventilation route again and again beneath the soft glow of a single overhead light. Every line ends at the same place. Every question returns to the same room. Just before sunrise, he requests a brief meeting with the hospital facilities supervisor, explaining everything he has witnessed over the past several days. He speaks calmly, making no accusations and offering no dramatic conclusions. He simply describes Ranger's unwavering behavior, the changing mechanical hum, the faint unfamiliar odor, and the connection between Ethan's room and the locked service area. The supervisor listens respectfully before agreeing that a precautionary inspection would be reasonable. Within the hour, 2 maintenance technicians unlock the service room while Daniel waits quietly outside with Ranger. The narrow space behind the heavy metal door is filled with insulated ductwork, electrical panels, air filters, and control equipment that quietly serves several patient rooms. At first glance, everything appears clean and properly maintained. One technician carefully checks the electrical system while another inspects the ventilation housing. Minutes pass without discovery. Daniel begins wondering whether he has placed too much faith in instinct alone. Then Ranger suddenly steps forward. Without barking or pulling, he walks directly toward one section of ductwork near the back wall and sits beside it with complete confidence. His nose lifts toward a small inspection panel secured by several screws. He never looks anywhere else. One technician smiles politely, but decides to remove the panel anyway. As the cover comes away, both technicians pause. Inside the narrow section of ductwork, they discover that one specialized air filtration cartridge has been installed incorrectly after a recent maintenance service. Instead of sealing tightly inside its housing, a small gap has allowed trace amounts of cleaning vapor used during periodic equipment sanitation to circulate intermittently through a limited section of the ventilation system whenever airflow pressure changed. The concentration is extremely low, far below levels that would affect most healthy people. But the supervisor quietly explains that an individual with unusual sensitivity could experience persistent, unexplained symptoms over time. Daniel looks toward Ranger without saying a word. The German Shepherd simply remains seated, his calm eyes fixed on the open panel, as though confirming that the silent mystery has finally been found. The supervisor immediately orders a complete replacement of the filtration assembly and requests environmental testing throughout the affected ventilation line as an additional precaution. Hospital administrators are notified, not because anyone acted carelessly, but because even the smallest oversight deserves careful review when lives may be affected. Less than an hour later, Ethan is gently transferred to another room on a different floor while physicians begin reviewing the new information alongside every previous examination. No one promises that this discovery explains everything. Medicine rarely offers certainty so quickly. Yet for the first time since Ethan's strength began fading, every member of the medical team is finally looking in the same direction. As sunlight pours through the eastern windows, filling the quiet hallway with warm golden light, Ranger walks beside Ethan's moving hospital bed with peaceful confidence. He no longer glances toward the old room or the silent air vent. His attention never leaves Ethan again, as though the unseen burden he has been carrying has finally been placed into the hands of people ready to understand it. The next 24 hours unfold with cautious hope instead of certainty. Ethan Brooks rests in his new hospital room, where fresh morning light pours through a larger window overlooking a quiet courtyard filled with oak trees shedding their last autumn leaves. The familiar hum that once surrounded his bed is gone, replaced only by the distant chirping of sparrows gathering near a stone fountain below. Doctors continue working with careful precision. The environmental findings become one piece of a much larger puzzle rather than the final answer. Pulmonologists, toxicology specialists, and occupational medicine physicians meet together for the first time, reviewing every laboratory report beside the newly discovered ventilation issue. What once appeared to be unrelated symptoms suddenly begin fitting together with remarkable clarity. One physician quietly explains that prolonged exposure to even extremely small environmental irritants can sometimes produce uncommon reactions in rare individuals, especially when those exposures continue unnoticed over many weeks. No one claims that the situation was predictable. Instead, the discussion shifts toward recovery rather than mystery. Ethan listens carefully while sitting upright for the first time in days. His face still carries the exhaustion that has slowly settled over him during the past several weeks, yet something has changed. His breathing feels slightly easier. The improvement is almost impossible to measure, but Ethan notices it before anyone else does. When he takes a slow, steady breath, it no longer feels as though an invisible weight is pressing gently against his chest. Ranger notices the difference as well. Instead of watching every movement with constant concern, the German Shepherd quietly stretches across the floor beside the bed, resting his head on his front paws with a calm expression that Daniel Carter has not seen since this long journey began. The retired Marine smiles to himself without saying a word. Experience has taught him that healing often announces itself in whispers instead of celebrations. Throughout the afternoon, nurses observe Ethan walking a short distance down the hallway with careful supervision. Only the day before, even standing had required enormous effort. Now he manages nearly 50 feet before stopping to rest. The distance is modest, but every step feels like a promise that tomorrow might carry a little more strength than today. Hospital staff members who have followed Ethan's case quietly encourage him as he passes. Their smiles no longer hide uncertainty. They carry genuine optimism. Later that evening, the attending physician enters the room holding an updated treatment plan. Additional supportive therapy, continued observation, and fresh air away from the affected environment become the immediate priorities. The doctor pauses beside Ranger and gently smiles. He admits that medicine depends upon careful observation, yet sometimes the most important observation comes from a place no textbook could have predicted. Ethan reaches down and slowly places his hand against Ranger's warm neck. The German Shepherd closes his eyes for a peaceful moment before leaning gently into the familiar touch. Outside the window, the setting sun paints the sky with soft shades of orange and deep blue while the first evening stars quietly appear above the hospital. Daniel watches the peaceful scene from the doorway, realizing that the greatest turning point did not arrive through dramatic heroics or impossible miracles. It began with one faithful soul who refused to ignore what his heart and senses continued telling him, even when the entire world believed there was nothing left to find. 3 mornings later, the first real sign of recovery arrives so quietly that almost no one notices it at first. The sun rises over the hospital courtyard, covering the walking paths with gentle golden light, while a cool breeze carries the last scent of autumn through the open entrance each time visitors arrive. Ethan Brooks wakes before his nurse enters the room. For the first time in weeks, he does not feel as though he has spent the entire night climbing a mountain in his sleep. He sits upright without asking for assistance and slowly swings his feet onto the floor. The movement is small, ordinary even, yet it feels like reclaiming a forgotten part of himself. Ranger lifts his head from the blanket beside the bed and watches every motion with calm, steady eyes. There is no anxious pacing now, no fixed stare toward distant walls. The German shepherd simply observes his partner with peaceful confidence, as though he has been waiting for this morning all along. During the daily examination, Ethan's physician studies the latest reports with careful optimism. His breathing has become more consistent. His energy has improved little by little each day since moving to the new room and beginning the updated treatment plan. The improvement is gradual rather than dramatic, exactly the kind physicians trust most. Healing that lasts rarely arrives all at once. Ethan is encouraged to continue walking several times throughout the day. This time he reaches the end of the hallway without stopping. Nearly 100 feet passes beneath his steady steps before he pauses beside a large window overlooking the courtyard. He rests one hand against the railing and smiles as he watches two young brothers laughing while chasing bright orange leaves across the grass below. It is the first genuine smile that reaches his eyes in many weeks. Ranger quietly stands beside him, looking outside instead of watching Ethan's every breath. Daniel Carter notices that simple change more than any medical chart could ever reveal. A faithful guardian finally feels safe enough to relax. Throughout the afternoon, nurses who have cared for Ethan since his admission stop by for brief visits. They are careful not to celebrate too soon, but hope has unmistakably returned to their voices. One nurse jokingly tells Ethan that he is becoming the most popular patient on the floor because everyone wants to know how Ranger is doing. Ethan laughs softly, and the sound surprises even him. It is warm, natural, and free from the exhaustion that once followed every sentence. Before leaving, the nurse kneels beside Ranger and thanks him with a gentle scratch behind the ears. This time the German shepherd happily accepts the attention before resting his head against Ethan's leg. As evening settles outside the hospital, Daniel quietly places his weathered Marine Corps cap on the chair beside Ethan's bed and looks toward the fading sky beyond the window. He has witnessed many victories during his lifetime, but few have begun with such humble moments. Not applause, not headlines. Only one recovering officer, one loyal dog, and one ordinary hospital room filled with gratitude instead of uncertainty. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, church bells ring softly through the cool evening air. Ethan closes his eyes for a brief moment, takes one long, comfortable breath, and realizes that hope no longer feels like something he is chasing. It has quietly found its way back to him, one faithful step at a time. 1 week later, the hospital no longer feels like a place suspended between fear and uncertainty. Morning sunlight pours through the windows with a warmth that seems brighter than before, illuminating polished floors where nurses greet Ethan Brooks by name instead of room number. The quiet tension that once lingered outside his door has gradually given way to ordinary conversations, cheerful smiles, and the comforting rhythm of recovery. Ethan now walks the hallway 3 times each day without assistance. His strength has not fully returned, but every steady step reminds him that healing is measured by patience rather than speed. Ranger remains faithfully beside him, matching each stride with effortless confidence. The German shepherd no longer pauses near ventilation grills or glances toward distant service corridors. Whatever silent burden had occupied his attention has disappeared completely. Daniel Carter notices that change before anyone else. He smiles softly because, in his experience, working dogs rarely celebrate victories. They simply return to protecting the people they love. Later that afternoon, Ethan's attending physician gathers with several members of the medical team inside a quiet consultation room. Medical charts, environmental reports, and maintenance records are spread across a large wooden table. The physician explains that Ethan's condition likely resulted from an uncommon combination of prolonged sensitivity and repeated exposure to trace airborne cleaning compounds that escaped through the improperly seated filtration cartridge. The exposure alone might never have explained every symptom, but when combined with Ethan's unique biological response, it created a pattern so unusual that standard testing naturally pointed physicians in many different directions. The discovery does not diminish the remarkable work performed by the specialists. Instead, it reminds everyone that medicine sometimes advances because one overlooked observation encourages people to ask a different question. The physician pauses before adding something that surprises everyone in the room. If Ranger had not continued drawing attention to the same location day after day, the environmental inspection probably would not have happened until much later. Ethan listens quietly, his eyes resting on the German Shepherd lying peacefully beside his chair. Memories begin returning with remarkable clarity. Every evening walk beside the lake. Every patient glance during difficult days. Every gentle nudge that had seemed ordinary at the time. He slowly kneels despite the stiffness still lingering in his legs and wraps both arms around Ranger's strong neck. The German Shepherd leans gently into the embrace, closing his eyes with complete trust. No words are necessary. Daniel quietly looks away for a moment, giving them the privacy that gratitude deserves. Before leaving the consultation room, the attending physician bends down to stroke Ranger's head. He smiles warmly and admits that years of medical training have taught him to trust evidence above assumptions. But this experience has reminded him that evidence sometimes begins with simply paying attention. Outside, the afternoon breeze carries golden leaves across the hospital courtyard while families enjoy the gentle sunshine after several days of rain. Ethan stands beside the window with Daniel, watching the peaceful scene unfold below. Neither man speaks for several moments. Finally, Daniel breaks the silence with a quiet voice shaped by decades of service. He says that courage does not always wear a uniform, and wisdom does not always speak with words. Ethan nods slowly, resting one hand on Ranger's shoulder, knowing that the truest answer to his greatest mystery had been patiently waiting beside him all along. 2 weeks later, Ethan Brooks walks through the hospital lobby carrying nothing more than a light overnight bag, while Ranger moves quietly beside him, his leash hanging loosely because it is hardly needed. The automatic doors slide open, welcoming a crisp November morning filled with cool air and the gentle scent of pine carried from nearby trees. Ethan pauses before taking another step, not because he is tired, but because he wants to remember this moment. There was a time when simply standing had felt like climbing a mountain. Now each breath comes naturally, each heartbeat steady and unburdened. Nurses gather near the front desk to wish him well before he leaves. Some have cared for him since his first uncertain days. Others only know the story through quiet conversations passed from one shift to another. Every smile carries genuine warmth. One young nurse kneels beside Ranger and gently scratches beneath his chin. She thanks him with tears quietly gathering in her eyes, admitting that she has never witnessed anything quite like what happened during the past several weeks. Ranger responds the only way he knows how, leaning gently into her hand before looking back toward Ethan with calm confidence. Later that afternoon, the hospital hosts a small meeting for physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, and facilities personnel. The purpose is not to celebrate one remarkable case, but to learn from it. Updated inspection procedures are introduced, additional environmental reviews become part of routine maintenance, and medical teams discuss the importance of remaining open to unexpected observations, no matter where they originate. The attending physician speaks with quiet humility. He explains that science grows stronger when curiosity remains alive, and that careful listening sometimes begins long before anyone speaks. Daniel Carter stands quietly near the back of the room, wearing the same weathered Marine Corps cap that first caught Ethan's attention. He never asks for recognition. He simply feels grateful that one small decision to trust a faithful dog helped open a different path toward the truth. After the meeting ends, the physician walks over to Daniel and thanks him personally. Daniel smiles gently before answering that he merely followed someone who had been pointing in the right direction all along. His eyes settle on Ranger resting peacefully beside Ethan's chair. As the afternoon sun stretches long golden shadows across the courtyard, Ethan, Daniel, and Ranger share coffee on a quiet bench overlooking the same stone fountain Ethan had watched through his hospital window. Children laugh nearby while dry leaves drift softly across the sidewalks. Everything feels wonderfully ordinary again. Ethan looks toward Daniel and admits that surviving has changed the way he sees every ordinary morning, every peaceful walk, and every familiar face. Daniel nods slowly, understanding without needing further explanation. Before they leave, Ethan removes the small police challenge coin he has carried in his pocket for years and places it gently on the bench beside Ranger. He smiles as the German Shepherd curiously nudges it with his nose. Ethan quietly says that medals belong to people who expect recognition, but loyalty asks for nothing except the chance to stay beside the one it loves. Ranger simply rests his head against Ethan's knee while the late afternoon light wraps around them with quiet grace, leaving everyone who witnesses the moment with the unmistakable feeling that some of life's greatest lessons arrive without ever speaking a single word. 6 months pass as quietly as the changing seasons. Winter slowly gives way to spring, and the small Ohio town awakens beneath clear blue skies, fresh green trees, and the familiar sounds of children riding bicycles through peaceful neighborhoods. Every morning, Officer Ethan Brooks wakes before sunrise just as he always has. The difference is that now he pauses for a single grateful breath before beginning the day. He has returned to duty on a limited schedule, spending more time working with neighborhood outreach programs than answering emergency calls. He visits local schools, speaks with young cadets, and reminds new officers that paying attention to small details can sometimes protect lives in ways no one expects. Ranger never leaves his side. The German Shepherd walks through every hallway, every park, and every community event with the same calm confidence that first earned Ethan's trust years ago. Many people recognize them now, but very few know the entire story. Ethan has never sought interviews or public attention. Daniel Carter feels exactly the same. Their greatest reward has always been seeing ordinary life return. On warm Saturday mornings, the three friends often meet beside the quiet lake where Ethan and Ranger once ended every shift together. The old wooden bench still faces the water. Ducks glide peacefully across gentle ripples while sunlight dances between the branches overhead. Daniel always brings fresh coffee. Ethan always carries a small bag of dog treats. Ranger always chooses the same place beside the bench, resting comfortably while watching the breeze move across the lake. One afternoon, a young police recruit approaches Ethan after recognizing him from a departmental newsletter describing improvements made to hospital safety procedures. The recruit politely asks what lesson mattered most after everything he experienced. Ethan smiles thoughtfully before looking toward Ranger. He explains that knowledge is powerful, training is essential, and experience saves lives, but none of those gifts should ever replace humility. The moment people believe they have nothing left to learn is often the moment they stop seeing what has been quietly waiting in front of them all along. The recruit nods with deep respect before walking away. Daniel watches the conversation from the nearby bench and smiles to himself. He knows that some lessons can never be taught inside classrooms alone. As evening settles across the lake, golden light stretches over the water exactly as it did before Ethan became ill. Ranger slowly rises, walks to the shoreline, and pauses for a moment, listening to the wind moving gently through the reeds. Then he turns back toward Ethan with peaceful eyes free from worry. Ethan kneels and places one hand against the dog's warm neck, feeling the steady heartbeat that never abandoned him when answers seemed impossible to find. Neither man nor dog needs words. The silence itself says everything. Above them, the first stars quietly appear in the deepening sky while church bells echo softly across the town. Life moves forward just as it always has, carrying both joy and uncertainty. Yet some bonds become stronger because they have already walked through the unknown together. People may remember the remarkable medical mystery, the careful investigation, or the unexpected discovery hidden inside an ordinary hospital. Ethan remembers something simpler. When every explanation failed, one faithful soul refused to stop believing that the truth was still there. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with flashing lights or extraordinary moments. Sometimes they arrive on 4 quiet paws, asking only that someone be willing to notice where love has been pointing all along.